Hey everybody, and welcome back to this Python series. In the previous lesson we covered while loops, and for this lesson, today's topic is going to be for loops. So before we go and jump into some examples for loops, let's go ahead and do a comparison between for loops versus while loops. So for loops are better to use when you know the number of iterations in advance, or if you want to iterate over a sequence. So some examples of that could be a string, a list, or a tuple. Now, while loops are better to use when you don't know the number of iterations in advance, or if you want to repeat a block of code as long as a certain condition remains true. And that is important because you don't know how long that condition will remain true before it eventually becomes false. So if you don't know how much iterations in advance, then while loops are better to use for that kind of situations. So as for which one is better to use for your program, well, that's really up to you because either choice will come with different benefits. So one task, maybe a for loop could be better, while on the other hand, a while loop might be more ideal for a different situation. So this question is really up to you, in this case, on which one you want to use for your program. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump straight into the lesson. So for this example, we're going to go and set up a for loop that will iterate over a range. So to get started, type in for, and then you can call this variable name as I, but you can choose whatever name you want for the variable. So do for variable name, then in range, and then for this example, I am choosing 10, because 10 is not too long, but also not too short for this example. And then inside this for loop, we are going to have a line that will print out the value in the interactive shell. So do print count, and then before we can reference the variable in this print function, we first need to convert the data type. So if we can't just do this, that will throw us an error. It will tell you before that you cannot concatenate the string along with the integer. So to do this, we're going to type in str for string, and then inside this parentheses, you're going to type in I, and then do an extra closing parentheses because this other one over here closes off this. So we want this extra one to close off the parentheses that contains the variable name. So now if we run this program, you can see that it by default, since we didn't specify where we wanted I to start at, it will start from 0 and it will go all the way up to 9. So this for loop is saying that it will count up to but not including 10. If you wanted to include 10, we can just change that to 11, and then it will become 10 inclusive, just like what it shows over here. Alright, we're gonna go ahead and play with this same for loop a little bit more, so don't erase this yet. We're just gonna type some more numbers inside this parentheses over here. So right now we're at 11, but let's specify it so that it starts. We're gonna go ahead and go to the very left of the number. We want this to start at 4. So let's run this program again, and as you can see, it is 4 inclusive but 11 exclusive. So the left side will be inclusive and the right side number will be excluded. So that is one way we can control the range for where you want your for loop to iterate. So the next thing we can do, I'm going to go ahead and make this a negative as well, just to make it even longer. So in this case, it will start at -4 and it will end at 10. Run the program right now. As you can see over here, it counts all the way up until 10. Alright, the next thing we can do is also play around with a third value inside here, and I want you to notice what happens when I add in the number 2. So this is the minimum value, that's the maximum value, and so if you notice, when we added number 2, it is now counting up by 2 instead of counting up by 1 like it did by default. So that's what this third value does. We can even make it count up by, let's do 5 for example. So let me go ahead and run that right now. And as you can see, it's way shorter because, again, it goes from -4, plus 5 is +1, plus 5 is going to be +6, and since it's, like I said earlier, it will exclude the maximum value, 11, even though 6 plus 5 is 11, it will not show up. If we wanted to show 11, we can change this to 12. Let me go ahead and execute the program, and there we go, it shows number 11. We can also even make this count down, actually. So right now we are counting up, count down by 2. However, for this we'll also have to mess around with these two numbers because the minimum is lower than the maximum. If you want it to go down, it will not really work. So in this case, what we can do is set this to 1, and then the first value, let's set this to maybe 20. And it should start at 20 and go down by 2. Let's see if that happens. And that is exactly what happened. It starts at 20, because it's 20 inclusive, and it goes all the way down until it hits the minimum value now, in this case. So let's do another for loop, but this time we are going to make it iterate over a list. I'm going to get rid of that original one, and let's go and type in the list. In this case, let's do fruits. And then we can have a couple of values inside. So let's do, the first fruit could be, I don't know, grapes. Let's do apples, and then do oranges. You can add more if you want to. It doesn't really matter because this for loop will just really go over the whole list anyway. Let me go ahead and type in the list. So let's call this variable name as fruit picked, and then in fruits, I'm gonna make sure that the second one is the exact same name as the variable that is called fruits, because if you don't do that, it will obviously throw you an error. So now we can drop down a line and print fruit picked, which is going to be the variable name that we picked. So, and if we run the program, you can see that it indeed went from grapes, apples to oranges. Now let's add in another string. Let's call, what else? Bananas maybe, and let's do what else can we add? Though we can also add watermelons. Let's do that. Let me run it again. And there you go. So as you can see, we can also use for loops to like iterate over lists as well. So before we stop this, let's go ahead and do the type, so we can see on the interactive shell, we can see what the type of that variable is. So we can just do print type fruits, and if we run the program, you can see that it is indeed a list. Alright, so to recap, I made sure to show the first example and the second example that we did throughout the video. For the first one, we have 3 values inside this function, the range function, and the first one over here, that is number 1, is simply the start parameter, which will indicate the starting value of the sequence. And then in this example over here, I'm going to be starting at 1. It'll be 1 inclusive, and then it will go all the way up, and then it will check for the second parameter that will indicate the end value of the sequence. You can also call it the stop parameter, and it will iterate until we reach this, and also it'll be excluding the number that's listed in. So it's actually going to be 10 exclusive. For the third parameter, it will go up or down depending on how much you want. Like for example, if you want this over here, we want it to go up by 2. If we did a negative, it will go down by 2, and then we can do it as well like this. It will count up by 3 or count down by 3, depending on what sign we have in front. So let me run it right now. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of this first, run it. So if we don't have a third parameter, it will just simply go up by 1 by default. But if we add that in and run the program again, it will go up by 2 for this example. So that's how the third parameter will be like in the first example of a for loop. Let me go in and put back the second example, and for this one, we also learned that we can also iterate a for loop over a list, and which we did over here, and we can do it really as much as we want to. It will just print everything starting from the first index. So that's it for loops. I will see you in the next lesson, so stay tuned.